Hi guys, and welcome to Storytime. So I've found, or had sent to me, another absolutely fantastic story off of the forums. This is from the Wildstar forums. I got sent this on the Wildstar role-playing forums by Rocio. You can find this story on the official Wildstar forums. There'll be a link down in the description. You should be able to see that if you scroll down, and if you just want to read it in your own time, rather than listen to me waffle on about it. So, without too much rambling, we've got this story to read out. It's going to be a slightly longer episode, I think, from the length of the story. We'll just have to see how it goes. But I would like to say a huge thank you to Tony Ray and Dee Dee for the shout out on 0 to 50. That was awesome. That was so cool. I completely missed it because I joined the stream late, but when I was watching it back on the great and powerful YouTube, I couldn't believe it. I nearly fell out of my chair. I was like, oh my god, they're talking about me. So that was really cool. But enough waffling from me. It is a Tuesday, and Tuesdays mean story time. So you get to chill out with your hot chocolate in your pyjamas and listen to me telling wonderful stories in my terrible British tones. So here we go. Right, this is Lessons by Rocio. Rocio had not quite recovered from his ordeal. The nerves in his body still echoed the pain like the pricks of 1,000 needles when he bathed and changed his clothes. Nanny's food, chilled and inedible, was tossed to the slanks. Here, Thresh gave him a metal mask. This is what you need to wear when you're out with me. There was a small slit to see out of, and holes for him to breathe. It fit rather comfortably around his ears. An elastic hood kept his hair tight to his head. They were leaving. Thresh didn't explain why. He just gathered him on his motorcycle and sped off. The entire ride was agony. The vibration of the motor and the unevenness of the road was brutal on his sore joints and muscles. He tried to take his mind off it by watching the world speed by. The landscape suddenly began to change, and the air took on a biting chill. The Aurin in him sensed that something was profoundly wrong. The ground was covered in a thick layer of snow. The change was faster than a sunset. Why is it cold? As usual, Thresh didn't answer. They passed a sign. Welcome to Whitevale, the coldest hell on Nexus. Thermot Cold was loud and smelled of beer, urine and gasoline. Everyone walked around with enormous rifles and blades. They stopped at what seemed to be a bar like in Thade, just without the festive atmosphere. Stop staring! Rocio dropped his eyes to his hands. Wait here, don't look at or speak with anyone. He sat quietly for a long time. He wondered where he had gone and why he had left him alone with such scary people. He wouldn't find out until later, but he was being carefully watched. The Blackhoods maintained a heavy presence in Whitevale. Several agents were stationed around the building where he was waiting. There was probably no safer place for him than outside a seedy bar full of dangerous-looking strangers. Thresh returned with enough supplies to tell Rocio that he was going to be gone a very long time. He extended a rack to the back of the bike and tightly strapped boxes and packs and bundles of equipment to it, then did the same thing to both sides. He wordlessly gave Rocio a coat to wear and a dry piece of compressed bread to eat. Then they took off again, down the main road, then onto a warm path. When the path disappeared, the motorbike suddenly jolted, its wheels turning themselves flat, and began to hover over the snow. There were no tracks to tell anyone where they were going, flying above the mountain and then down into the valley. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped. There was a large stand of half-frozen trees gathered around an artificial cave cut out of the mountain. He could sense the trees struggling under the unnatural conditions. Thresh got off the bike and it immediately turned completely white with grey streaks to blend in with the surrounding snow. He was told to go inside and wait for him. Thresh unloaded the bike, all the equipment, all the supplies. In an hour they were sitting next to a fire, drinking a watery soup from small cups. Several years ago I had two students. One worked very hard, the other did not want to work, but rather would spend his time thinking of clever ways to escape my notice. Can you guess which one died in the field? The lazy one? No, he continued. The one who worked hard did everything he was supposed to do, but he was not clever. As soon as his teacher was gone, he failed. This is not a contest of strength or will, but of stealth and survival. You are not to discuss anything that is said here. You are not to remove your mask, not even for other Blackhoods members. You must be careful not to let others trick you into giving up information, even within the organisation. You are already a target because of your race. You do not rely on Vitalis, but you need to eat more, sleep more. That difference is enough to target you. If someone ever asks you about your training, you are to tell them about how boring and forgettable it is. All you do is sit outside waiting for something to happen. Thresh was correct. Rocio had assumed that he would be training primarily around this cave, and in some ways he was right. But his main testing ground was actually the hidden Blackhoods bases around the area. There was no communication in or out of their camp. The only way for Thresh to communicate at all with the outside world was to leave that area and go to the bases. It was here that Rocio learned about the hierarchy within the organisation. Avra was the lead of the group. Under her were Lazarin and the alchemist who worked for him, who provided the Vitalis, on which everyone's lives depended. Below that were the agents specialising in black ops and top secret missions against the Dominion. Below that were field operatives, surveillance teams, hackers, technical support and interrogators. Then there were accepted recruits. And then, at the very bottom, there was Rocio. His teacher seemed well known and well liked, so even though some of the lower rankers would send him on annoying and humiliating chores, mid-range and higher agents would look over his head and ignore him out of deference to his supervisor. One notable exception was Sojan, his eventual team lead. Sojan would sometimes call him the Chick, or the Jabbit, and make unkind comments about Arborea within his hearing. Thresh simply nodded, but Rocio wanted to scratch his eyes out. Sojan led one of the highest ranking groups in the Blackhoods. Therefore, he felt free to play tricks on him, and the rest of his team would join in on the fun. Thresh usually dragged him out to the bases in the middle of the night, after he was already exhausted from a full day's training. If he seemed to be nodding off, they would nudge him to make him fall over, or step on his tail. If he so much as saw one of their vehicles, or one of their snipers around, he would wait for Thresh to enter the building, and then disappear to find a place to hide. But they were highly trained to find people, knew the area better, and when not on duty, were very, very bored. Once in their clutches, they would usually take his mask and put it somewhere hard to find, or hard to reach, and make him go retrieve it, watching and mocking him the entire way. Rocio rarely had time to eat at their hidden training camp. There were places on the bases where food was stored, but he soon found that these were rigged with painful traps to keep the slanks out, they told him. He learned very quickly to steal food from the bunks and operations rooms, to check to see if it was tampered with to avoid getting sick. As he became more adept at thievery, he found out when a supply crate was coming in and started sneaking into the trucks themselves and taking his pick. Getting sleep was far more challenging. Finding an area that wasn't trafficked by some sort of guard or surveillance device was much harder than finding food. He learned to perch himself in the blind spots of the cameras, or to curl up among groups of stones like a chewer. Even then, sometimes he would wake up locked in a crate or a closet. How to be an escape artist was his next lesson. He began to understand what Thresh meant by his story he told him at the beginning. The more clever and observant he became, the less hungry and tired he was, the more he could concentrate on his studies. When he wasn't making physical training, he was getting up to speed on all things technological, alchemical, and mechanical. He spent time studying maps, learning how to speak and read and write codes, the history of all the races, Nexus, and the Elden. A test would come on anything he was given to study. He had to answer correctly, perform without hesitation, or Thresh would box his ears. Despite the frequent painful punishments, Thresh often spoke of his advantages. No one would expect an Aurins Blackhood spy. One of the easiest ways to go unnoticed, he told him, is to be unexpected. It's hard them to see you if they're not looking for you. So he began to conceal himself, even while travelling to exile stations that were unrelated to the organisation. He hid in the cargo rack covered in a blanket. Once Thresh had gotten enough distance from him, he would slip out of the blanket, pretend to be a simple bike repair tech, and then would practice hiding and spying on all the residents of the town. No one there took him for an agent in training, and he would come back with figurative armfuls of information, which Thresh would make him put down in mock-up reports. But he couldn't rely on his Aurinity among the Dominion, of course. Makari were particularly difficult to avoid, but even they were not perfect. Thresh once placed him outside during an entire night blizzard, telling him to remain as still as possible, threatening him that if he cried about it, he would throw water on him. It seemed cruel at first, but as he lay still, the snow drifted over him. Thresh came outside when the dawn broke and told him that not even a Makari could find him now. The snow insulated him so well that the heat of his body was invisible. Rocio had many lessons like this. For that reason, no matter how terribly he was bullied, no matter how doggedly Sojin and his cronies pursued him around the base, he gradually stopped feeling angry or resentful. As he improved, the tables began to be turned. He began to train his tormentors into their own trails, to hide in plain sight. Rather than sneak around looking for the basics, he took to stealing pillows, recordings of music and jewellery, which he was proud to wear around the lower-ranking spies who knew it was stolen, lower-ranking spies who he began to ignore. He couldn't be punished if they couldn't catch him. Were they going to complain to Thresh that they had just had their belongings pilfered by his trainee? He also learned to fight. One night, Thresh needed to replace his Vitalis. This was a very predictable trip, and Rocio knew that someone was going to be there, but even then he found himself cornered outside by one of Sojin's goons. Annoyed at his failure to escape, he just tossed his mask at the man's feet. "Thank you." He spun it idly on one finger. "Now come and get it." Rocio looked instead behind him, and made a break as though to run. The Mordesh caught him by the tail. "Where do you think you're—" Wrapping his tail completely around his arm, he did an about-face and sank his teeth and claws into his bicep and shoulder. The weight of his body brought the agent to the ground, and the mask went flying. In a leap, Rocio caught it and dashed away. In only 3 months, Nexus had become his playground. He lived almost entirely in the shadows. Back on Arborea, young men like him trained to be a watcher, but in his family he had been as good as a deaf mute. Among the Mordesh, his ability to read minds, while still a bit lacking by his family's standards, gave him a great advantage. The world of Nexus opened up his way to him. He could tell time by the dilation of his eyes. He could travel by the lights of the stars. The old Rocio was gone, killed by this new creature in a mask. The time came to take him out on his first mission as a trainee. It was what they called a pre-op, or scouting mission. The objective was simply to scout out the area and make notes in preparation for future unknown engagement. He walked in silence, in Thresh's footfalls. There was a dread operation going on very nearby, something involving poisons. He felt a thrill go down his spine to the tip of his tail when they began to gather, appearing like wraiths from all directions without any particular signal. Their job was specifically to find out where the security systems were, how they worked, and to map out any routes of the guards, and to time when they were changed. No one spoke, but everyone was wearing a special piece in their ear connected by a tiny wire just inside their jaw. If they put their teeth together, it made a very low-frequency signal. By chattering their teeth in a pattern, they could communicate. Silence was maintained even across the channel until a single word was broadcast. Body. In a small clearing, the body of an Aurin, an explorer by the looks of him, lay half decomposed under an outcrop. The group halted and spread out, eyes warily darting around. Rocio grieved at the sight, excitement replaced by both fear and sorrow. No one wanted to die like that, out in the middle of nowhere, alone. "Camera," came across the channel. While the other members prepared to attempt an examination of the surveillance system, Rocio could sense Thresh's eyes on him, so he swallowed his feelings and refocused. He had one job, scan for Makari, but there were none, so he was given a new job. Placing bugged devices around the perimeter, the surveillance system was not live monitored. It took a snapshot of the area, in a wave, 30 seconds between each camera shot. Each digital photograph was fed into turrets that would fire at any suspicious image. The dead Aurin did not understand this, and thought it was safe just hiding under a rock. "Go!" He dashed off on all fours, staying as low to the ground as possible. Each bugged device had a small adhesive patch. He had to find an unseen spot, stick it and move on. There was no time to think or debate between one spot or another. Here and go. Here, go. As he came back around to where the group was waiting, he was so focused on his job that he failed to notice the foot that suddenly appeared until it tripped him over. Sprawling in the gravel, he scrambled to his feet and saw Thresh pinning the perpetrator against a boulder, his elbow pressed against his throat, snarling and dire, warning into his face. The sight startled him. Thresh had never defended him before. Unbeknownst to Rocio, the attention given to him from the start only made his continued progression that more remarkable to the other Mordesh. Some were neutral about him, others were hostile to his introduction into their world, and the sight of him thriving galled them further. Back at the home camp, sitting at the entrance of the cave, Rocio apologised for his inattention. But on missions, no matter how small, Thresh explained, they were to work as a team. He shouldn't have to watch his back around his own teammates. Rocio could have been hurt. The fall could have attracted attention from an unseen observer. Your abilities were revealed to the lower levels in sharp contrast to their lack, so much so that one felt jealous enough to commit such a petty act. No one wants their main job to be reduced to a trainee's baby steps. He swore in his annoyance. It is empty-headed actions like that which cemented him as a scouter. I warned you against those who would pursue you for your race. Now I must warn you against those who would pursue you for your talents. Is there anyone I can trust? He was silent for a while. It's hard to say. I've been rubbing a few shoulders, but you are a very small fish. It is easier to eat you than to defend you. But a small fish can hide right up under the fins of the big ones. The Mordesh nodded approvingly. You will need a big fish, and I have just the right spot for you. Okay, and guys, thank you very much for listening to this story. That was Lessons by Rocio. There'll be another story time out next week, so do get your stories in. I do choose them weekly. I haven't chosen next week's one yet, so if you get them to me, you can have the chance of having your story read out as well. You can get hold of me on the Wildstar forums. There is a story time post there. You can find that. Again, I'll put that in the description. And you can find me on the Wildstar roleplay forums as well as on Twitter, Facebook, or you can just email me, and my email is on YouTube, so you can find that anyway. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like and subscribe, and why not share it around so other people get a little bit of story time in their lives, because who doesn't enjoy a good story? Thanks again for watching, guys. See you next time.